We are currently in my REST service file, which is located in the backend. So from here downwards, I have all the files and folders associated with my backend. So I also have RabbitMQ, publisher and consumer. And I have my clients.json file, which contains all of the user data and any trips they might have associated with them. I also have a weather.json file. So if the user wants to request weather for a certain location, but it's already been requested before, that data is saved, and so the information will be returned from this file instead. The backend communicates to the front end, which is located in the client GUI file, via HTTP requests. I've mainly used post and get methods. So post for submitting a trip and submitting interest, get requests for getting trips from other users, and also for getting interest. For the post requests, I use my producer, which is defined here in publish. So it will just trigger when I do a post request from my client. However, for a get request, how I do that is my consumer would be constantly listening out for messages. And so when the user does a get request, for an example, it will open up the clients.json file and look for the relevant data and return the JSON. So you can see for my post requests, I format the JSON here. So for example, for posting a trip, I have the message ID, the user ID that created it, longitude, latitude, date, and also have another extra parameter called trip ID. So if we scroll up here, we have post interest in trip. So it's a similar idea of the client sending a HTTP post request to backend, and then the producer sends off this JSON data. For get requests, we can either get other trips made by other users or get the current user's trip. So this will be useful for segregating that. And then we also have the get interest in trip, which is here, and here it's just basically getting the interested users from the clients.json file, which has been consumed earlier by the consumer. So when the user is first loading the page, they have this welcome user greeting with a pop-up. They can either enter their previous user ID, or they can alternatively generate a new one. This calls the backend to generate a new user ID by calling the random.org API. For a user ID, the clients.json file is checked, so there's no clashes. This function is also used for randomly generating message ID and trip ID. I also have the getting the weather as well, which calls the backend to get the current weather. Also, this is made in JSON, but also I get the hourly, and I do this by passing the in from XML to JSON. So you can see I can do that as well here. When the weather is loaded, if there is actually information for it, then we can load a very nice chart, basically. Another extra thing down here as well is that if the user has interested users in their trip, they can send an email to Mailtrap, which I have at the moment, with a message that they're confirmed to go on the trip. Just to quickly mention, in my consumer, before saving to the file, the data is matched against the schema and checks as well. Any issues or success is notified to the user. And I also have an admin panel, which I'll show you in a moment. So if I load my app now, which is connected to NQ's RabbitMQ, I have an existing user here, which they have some trips currently. So they have 2 trips. You can see that I load the trip information and the current weather and like an hourly in 3-hour intervals with this nice graph. If I look in my logs, I can see that these are sent from the JSON file because they're located already. If I created a new trip, let's say I do it for this location here, actually it autofills the longitude latitude if I enter a city, because it calls the Google API, which does that for me. I have a 2-week range restriction, so that's good. So if I submit this one and get my trip proposals, you can see there's a new trip as well now. And if I find it, it's the bottom one probably. So yeah, I got Hertfordshire here. That's the new trip. And you can see that initially it wasn't called from the file. So if I now get other trips, there's no other users right now. So why don't we go ahead and create a new user? And you can see this randomly generates a number, get trip. So you can see only the other users' trips right now. If I, let's say, create another trip in that location, but by this user, now they have 1 trip. So they're not registered in any trip, so I can confirm interest. That's a post request. If I get that trip again, you can see they're now registered for that trip. So that was trip ID 458. So if I reload my trip proposals. That one was it. Yeah, you can see now that user's also interested in the trip. So I've made 2 new users and then registered them in the trip. So if I just refresh this one as well, you can see they're registered in 458. So if I quickly grab 458, you can see there's two new users now, those 2 that I created. If I confirm interested users, then hopefully in a minute those emails would come through. Yeah, so here are the emails that come through for that trip as well. Also the admin panel, I guess I could show you quickly. So if I choose this user, I can actually delete a user. So if I go back to them now, refresh and try and enter their ID, they're not part of the local user base anymore. Let's take this trip, for example. We can delete that trip. So try delete that trip. If I load it again, sorry, it was this one, wasn't it? They don't have any more trips located anymore. I can delete a single interested user from a trip as well. So let's see. So I can take from this trip here, delete this user here, 007. So if I reload that now, that's removed. And if I can also delete all the users for a trip. So if I delete all the interested users in that trip again, there's no one interested now. So that's good. I'd like to also show that I've deployed my app onto the cloud using Heroku. So you can also access this as well. So this is a new user. So let me just enter some coordinates. This is probably not really a location, but I can see now, I accidentally submitted twice, but you can see this is connecting through my personal RabbitMQ. If I load this again, make another random user. So you can see all the like functionality is there, the same as for my local version. So that's great as well. So yeah, you can see that as well.